Welcome to Under the Rug at Work, where I shine light on things that are normally swept under the rug. Today, I'm chatting with Mariane Power about neurodiversity. Mariane, or Maz, is a clinical psychologist, speaker, neurodiversity specialist, and ADHD coach. Thank you so much for joining me, Maz.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. It feels like it's been a very overdue conversation. You and I were giggling off camera saying how long we've been in each other's circles and spheres. I'm such a big fan of this podcast and all the work you're doing. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I'm really excited to bring light to neurodiversity. I know that there's a lot of content, there's a lot of talk out there, but I do feel that it is something that's still swept under the rug because people don't really understand it that well. And when you're at work, you get so busy doing the work that we forget about the people that are in the team, and we forget about that everyone's different. And yeah, so I am really looking forward to this chat to talk to an expert about what it all means and how we can do better and be better. But let's start off with, well, what does it mean for someone to be neurodivergent? What does neurodiversity mean?
I like that you're starting by defining the topic. This is so important, isn't it? And I'm going to put in a little preface there because when Nicole says expert, I cringe. I don't in any way feel myself to be an expert, although for context, I guess if lived experience is a form of expertise, then I've got 40 plus years in the making. I learned of my own neurodivergence quite late in life. So I fit into the band camp of women who have been diagnosed later on with ADHD, which has been a really interesting journey because, you know, it's crossed alongside my professional work in this space for many, many years in working with neurodivergent folk, both in the work, but also in schools context with our company, Possify, and of course in my parenting roles. So we've known about our children being neurodivergent. Well, my son ever since he was born, although the diagnosis and that process didn't come till quite later. And then my daughter was also quite late in us uncovering her autism and ADHD. So it's a really interesting and emerging conversation. And yet for others, it's been one that's been around for forever. So in terms of those definitions and what does it mean to be neurodivergent, I also want to share that the language I'm using today is identity first. And that respects that for some who are coming into this space, there is a difference still of opinion around some of the definitions. So when I'm sharing, it's one from that lived experience perspective, but also from the latest take on the literature that I can kind of come through. So I hope that context is helpful.
Yes.
So when we're saying neurodivergent, I guess I look at that through the lens of the neurodiversity paradigm, which for your listeners who may not be familiar, Judy Singer in the 1990s was looking at this idea of what if we took some of the different neurotypes that we've got and removed some of the stigma, removed some of the medicalization, and actually recognize that the brains have got universal differences and that's a normal part of our diversity as a human population, in the same way that species have got all sorts of differences across all sorts of different aspects of life and presentation. So I guess for me in the psychology field, it's almost like how we had our clinical psychology and then positive psychology came along, and now we can look at everything being in the full spectrum of the mental health conversation. So if we think neurodiversity paradigm through that lens, and when we're saying neurodivergent or different neurotypes, I, at least through my perspective, both as an ADHD person, but also as somebody who works in this space, considers those different neurodevelopmental profiles that are different to the norms. They deviate from what is perceived to be neurotypical. And right. So neurodivergence is a little bit different to mental health, although there's crossover and we can talk about that later. But for somebody to have, I guess, a diagnosis or to identify as being neurodivergent, that's a brain difference that's been there and shown up across their life, family interactions, their work profile since they were born. So it's a difference or a variation in the brain that comes with its own unique strength and struggle profile. So I'm thinking of neurodevelopmental differences like autism, ADHD. They're probably the ones that we hear of most commonly. But then, of course, we've got specific learning differences. So within that, you might have heard the old language around dyslexia, dysgraphia, for example, dyscalculia, which haven't formally been assessed, but I'm pretty sure I tick the boxes for that one too. So yay for me. And of course, giftedness as well sits within that, that outlier, if you like, or a deviation from the norm of how a brain shows up and operates in the world. So a neurodivergent is, I guess, an identifier for somebody to say that they have that different type of brain or a different neurotype. And in terms of numbers, at the moment, we're looking at sort of a 20% representation of the general population. So still a minority group, if you like, or a minority neurotype, and that encompasses all of the different neurodivergent profiles. Then when you sort of break that down and look at, say, the autistic population or ADHD in isolation, of course, your representations change. But 20% is still quite a large number. So, and, I would say that 0.00001% is a very important number to be focusing on too. So hopefully that gives a little bit of context in terms of, what is this word neurodivergent all about, and answers your question.
It does. And yeah, I think sometimes in the workplace, people get overwhelmed by everyone being different, and then it just kind of it shuts down. Like, we've got the diversity targets that people try and match, but unless an organization is kind of focusing on something, an individual leader often would just shut down, because there's so much to think about and so much to do, that work and the tasks get the focus rather than the individual. And what I found, being a more successful leader is when you focus on the individual first, and then the individual is able to do the task or the role the best. So I think it's really important to have this conversation and kind of demystify what neurodiversity is, so that people aren't as fearful of it, and there isn't that kind of shutdown and that focus on just get the job done. I don't, all of this doesn't make any sense to me. And we can kind of really put the individual at the heart of the building the relationship and building the trust to be able to get the best for them and from them.
Yeah, 100%. A couple of thoughts on that. If we could sort of like double click, is that idea of diversity inclusion and needing to have our targets and needing to tick the boxes, which I always have these two reactions that happen in parallel, right? Like, on the one hand, I think that those targets, and we've seen this happen across the board in terms of the research around gender diversity, for example, unless we have those targets that say we want X number amount of women in the room to be having a seat at the conversation, unfortunately, in some organizations, and it doesn't happen. So I think that there is absolutely a role and a place for having diversity and inclusion targets. I also wanted to sort of share a thought that I had as you were speaking, is that you'll also hear within the neurodiversity conversation the argument that actually, if a neurodivergent is almost like an extreme part of a continuum of what is our lived experience, that all brain types are different, and that's where we're sort of in the literature talking about cognitive diversity, then how we respond or accommodate or have conversations that are curious and open and non-judgmental around neurodivergence, in the sense of a neurotype that has a particularly unique profile that might require accommodations, isn't that complicated. Because to your point, if we want to have a successful, thriving, flourishing business that is creative and innovative and agile, then we need all sorts of different representation. That's why we've got the diversity and inclusion targets, is because they're not just the right thing to do, they're actually really good for business.
Yes.
And so getting to know your individual people through that lens of, adopting a beginner's mindset, asking curious questions, being flexible and wondering, what are your strengths and what are your struggles, and how can we best set up an environment and a work support system that meets you where you're at, I think is just a general takeaway that applies really to all employees. So what I love about this space, to hopefully sum that very long tangent up, is that if we make some accommodations and adjustments and considerations and focus in on our neurodivergent population, actually what we create there is really good for all and translates across to all, which is different from, let's not pay attention to the fact that there is a population of people who are neurodivergent who really benefit from having quite targeted and specific interventions and attention all the more reason why, thank you for this opportunity to share some more sort of niche and specific information that hopefully is helpful.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. And I'm the same. There's like those two parallels that you think about it. Yeah. So I actually think that we could have an entire conversation, an entire pod just about that.
Oh yeah. Anytime.
But let's focus on this one first.
Perfect.
So
Done.
what do people really need to be mindful of at work when it comes to neurodiversity and neurodivergent people? Yeah.
Yeah, look, probably we just had something in action that was, pointed to. So if you think about my neurotype, right, ADHD, the myth, if you like, is that somebody with ADHD can't focus and they can't concentrate. So if I just speak specifically to my experience, what you would have heard just before is actually, it's not that we can't focus and we can't concentrate. Actually, one of our super strengths, if you like, and let's not go down that path of the toxic positivity. We can do that if you like, but I'm doing it again. We tend to go, woohoo, this is exciting. Let's follow this shiny light. And then, woohoo, there's another shiny light over there, and there's another shiny light, and go into a hyper-focused state around our intense interests.
Yeah.
So in terms of your question, what is it important for us to know at work? I think I can think of that from two different lenses. One, what does maybe an HR professional and or somebody in a leadership space who's thinking about their diversity and inclusion policies, what sort of things might they want to consider? And then if I'm a neurodivergent employee, or even if I haven't been formally identified, but can sort of start to see parts of myself in maybe what Maz is doing or what she's sharing, or examples of different neurotypes, then how can I equip myself with that, self-awareness first and foremost, and then self-advocacy skills to be able to make a difference. So if we think about the workplace and go back to those numbers of, 20% of our population is neurodivergent here in Australia, I guess we want to think twofold. One, unfortunately, the neurodivergent population is underrepresented in employment. So we know that we've got a lot of work to do in terms of closing that gap between neurodivergent people in education and then moving into successful employment. That's something I'm really passionate about because I think that with everything that we are coming to understand, that we already understand about the importance of diversity and the strengths within these different populations, there's just really no excuse to have those unemployment statistics. So that's first and foremost. But then in terms of neurodivergency and how it shows up in work, there's some research to suggest that different neurotypes are attracted into different industries. I mean, we know from a strengths perspective, ADHD and our propensity to really do so well with our big divergent thinking. We bring creative ideas to entrepreneurship and innovation. In terms of autism, that incredible ability to have a special interest and then hone in on the details. We see a large representation over in, say, engineering and STEM fields. Dyslexia, for example, I was reading a paper the other day where, that visual spatial strength that comes with the profile, it's fantastic for where that processing is really important, say for astronomy or for radiography. And so recognizing that actually it's probably when we apply our strengths as a neurodivergent as to where we will find our people and our place and our sense of belonging and really be able to thrive and contribute meaningfully is, to have a think. If you're a leader or you're in HR, what are the strengths that your people are bringing to your industry? And therefore, what neurotypes might be more typically there and how might you capitalize on that? So then as a neurodivergent person, recognizing the genuine struggles that can exist and the barriers that can exist to work, and what industries might be more helpful, less helpful, what advocacy you might want to build into your sort of employment sector profile, if you like, and who your support network is in general, is sort of just that kind of overarching aspect. I think it's really interesting as well to be looking at this through that psychosocial safety lens in terms of, is neurodiversity just this hot topic today? I'd like to think it's not. And I know that we're sort of launching this conversation in Neurodiversity Week. And so, the shining light is going to be there. But if we think about the ongoing conversation we've been having and awareness around the benefits of well-being, more broadly speaking, at work, when our people are doing well within themselves, when they have a sense that they matter, when they have a sense of understanding how their contribution matters within the bigger piece. And then we think about who are our most vulnerable people within that well-being matrix from that psychosocial safety lens, and who are going to deliver us the most incredible results if we can get our accommodations and supports right. Again, the 20% we're talking about, I would argue, probably want to sit at the top of your priority list. But then again, I may be biased. We'll see.
Yeah, there's so much great stuff you said there. I'm totally with you as well. Like, I can see a lot of things where it's like, I've got to go down this shiny object, and I will be hyper focused on a project, or like I can think of one I'm doing right now that I'm super excited to launch, which I only thought up a couple of weeks ago.
Amazing.
And I think there's, like, as you were saying, we are all divergent. There is no one typical brain that is the same as everyone else's. And we have the right people. If you have the right people in the right role, being supported by the right environment, then you can't help but thrive. And I feel like when we try and what's that quote? You try and get a fish to climb a tree, like, you'll never have success. And it's really about understanding us as individuals and what we want to do and what we're great at. And you as a leader, understanding your team as individuals, what they're great at, what they do, and helping them be the best that they can be. I think you said at the start, the base level is respect. And if we all had that, then we would see much more success in the workplace, I think. And I think it's not disrespect on purpose. It's almost a subconscious thing when we're just too focused on the task, not the person, or our own individual biases. We don't understand what they are, and then you can obviously offend someone or do something that you may not have meant to. But if we don't take the time to, as I said before, build the relationship and understand who you're working with, then that's where a lot of the issues can start and flow. So
yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I shared a post recently on LinkedIn that I was just really overwhelmed by the positive response, and it was speaking to some of the topics we've already spoken to, but specifically around this idea of the gap between education and employment within the neurodivergent space. And I had this one gentleman respond with, "Wouldn't it be wonderful when we move towards a day where labels aren't necessary, where we all, seek to understand each other at a human level and accommodate for each other's strengths and struggles in a way that's very respectful, and that is genuinely interested and wants to leverage our diversity." And the part of me that wishes for this incredible world to eventuate tomorrow is like, and then there's a realistic part of me that says, we're still at a point where, well, at least I think, and particularly in our Western cultures, where there is that need for language to be able to decipher difference and to be able to understand it in a way where then we can come with common humanity. And where I see, I think, the advantage of taking, I guess, a more broader scope from looking at, yes, we want a strengths and a struggles profile, and then also going, okay, well, what I think about like a neurotype. And some people are going to hate me for saying this, so I could get cancelled, so I have to be careful. But I almost think about a neurotype as being a really specific operating system. It's like, if I'm neurodivergent and I'm working with an incredibly neurotypical leader who has no idea of my natural tendency to go down the divergent thinking pathway, my natural tendency to be more vulnerable and more sensitive to information that comes around me, and therefore to pick up on details that perhaps other people might have missed, and maybe to even linger on those a little longer, of within ADHD, my natural tendency to maybe overanalyze parts of a conversation that may not be relevant to me, perhaps my ADHD tendency as well, the executive function, that means that I show up in the world with absolutely no perception of time and have to work really, really hard to understand why that would be important to a neurotypical. If I'm working with a leader that doesn't have that understanding of how my operating system was built in, that's going to present some real challenges. And I think there's an emerging conversation around, you know, in layman's terms, what gets referred to as the fact that neurodivergents have an invisible disability. And that's where self-advocacy, I think, comes in, because unless we as neurodivergent people really do understand our own operating system and have a good take on the parts of our makeup, of our, you know, executive function, which for listeners who aren't familiar with that term is basically like the parts of the brain that are responsible for rationalizing, for decision making, for organization, for planning. They are just different. That we're wired differently for how we interpret sensory information, our internal body cues. We've got more sensitive nervous systems. They're different to a neurotypical. And if we don't know that about ourselves, then we're not very well placed to be able to communicate with others as to why we behave the way we behave.
Yeah.
There's also, I guess, without that awareness for the individual, the extra suffering that comes in that I'm really passionate about seeing shift. So we know, for example, that within the neurodivergent population, the additional suffering that then can contribute to poor mental health outcomes and poor performance outcomes is from what we call that metacognition. So metacognition is like the thought about the thought. So I might see the behavior that I'm showing up repeatedly off time, but if I don't know about my ADHD and I haven't communicated to other people that this is a higher risk that I'm working to minimize, then I might develop a thought about my behavior that says, oh gosh, I've done it again. I've turned up without the time, but I don't know about ADHD. So my metacognition, or my thought about the thought, becomes an internalized perception of that deficit that is structural and brain-based that I make about me. So the internalized deficit might be, oh, I'm such an idiot. Like, why can't I get this right? I'm so lazy. You know, how come I can't be like other people? And so that's where the suffering comes in, because the minute that we as individuals disconnect ourselves from that experience of common humanity and see ourselves as other, we lose a sense of belonging. We assume that others won't have compassionate understanding and curious conversations, and that can take a life of its own. So, you know, pulling all that together, hopefully for the listener, because we've gone big again, as does this, you know, we've got that idea of, yes, we want to be saying that everybody's brains are different, and therefore let's look at this from the individualistic perspective of strengths and struggles profiling and how can we make this work for everyone. And I think there's absolutely a case for more specific, carefully curated and intentional conversations, policies and procedures to ensure that our neurodivergent people are feeling safe through that recruitment, that onboarding, and then, you know, employee retention pathways, whatever they look like in your organization.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you have just explained the majority of teams and leaders. Because we're still moving into a new era in some sense. And I do want to come back to that in a second, and maybe chat about some practical tools that leaders can implement.
Yeah.
I kind of want to share, I think, maybe a personal opinion as well. And it I don't know, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't, but I don't see that neurodiversity is a disability. I actually think it's a better ability in a different area. So I look at people as people, and a lot of the time when I'm leading a team, I'll chat with someone and say, what are your career goals? Where do you want to go? Who do you want to be? How can I help you get there? What do you love about your role, and what don't you like, and why? And the information you get from that is incredible. And you find out what they love, and what they love, they're often really good at. And I look at that, and the majority of the time, it's not something that I love and not something that I can do. So if you can provide the environment where they can thrive at something that they love, like I've seen people achieve so much from being supported in that way. And looking back, you could see that it is a neurodivergent way of thinking, or how their brain is wired. But yeah, I don't, just as a personal opinion, I don't see it as a disability. And I hope that doesn't ruffle any feathers, because I've met some incredible people who can do incredible things that I would never have imagined.
Super important point, and I'm really glad you raised it. first and foremost, thank you for speaking to, the neurodivergent strengths, because there are many. And actually, I was reading and shared some research recently that at least within the combat military sector, there was some research around ADHD leadership in particular. And leaders with ADHD, when accommodations were put in place, outperformed by a huge, I haven't got the effect size numbers in front of me, but I'll share the paper with you afterwards, significant effect sizes on combat dilemmas. And so to your point, when we really take that lens and say, well, what can somebody bring to the table, and how can we therefore support the environment so that they can shine? We just see off the charts results. Again, in terms of, if your listeners are thinking, okay, well, what's my return on investment? Which is a practical, conversation to have around, why would I invest in my training, blah, blah, blah. It's a good case for business. If I come back though to this idea of, does that mean that we get rid of our disability language? I would argue no.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that neurodivergent neurotypes fit within the disability sector, and where I want to see the conversation moving towards, is that it's not something that needs to be dichotomous. So disability is actually only ever there because our differences and how they show up in the world, whether that be a physical disability or, in our case, a brain-based disability. And then there's a whole other aspects of that conversation. But when that shows up in the world and there is no accommodation, that's where the disability amplifies itself, and that's where functioning is impaired, and that's where people really genuinely need supports. So in no way do I want to shy away from the overwhelming statistics around the instances of mental illness that impact I'm going to say our community more significantly, the instances of unemployment rates, the instances of oh gosh, so many psychosocial consequences. And again, happy to share that paper with you. But recognizing that for neurotypes with brain-based differences, that disability will often show up under periods of stress. Mm-hmm. So for women, for example, the hormonal changes that happen postpartum, that happen during major transitions, that happen perimenopause and menopause, for autism, some of the, I guess, fluctuations, if you like, in terms of difficulties can happen because of changes in circumstance or leadership teams, for example, or changes in a family environment. And so if you think about how we show up in the world and how everybody can shift in that, functioning to flourishing space or continuum, I would encourage you to think about the language of strengths and then differences and or disabilities as being still quite functional, because without that disability lens, unfortunately, I think in the time and place that we find ourselves living in, while I love for that future where we can see each other's strengths and just look through that lens, we also all have to put food on the table and we have to be able to show up. And for those of us who have dysfunction, if you like, to a point where the environment isn't compensating for our differences, the disability language is still, I think, very important. So that's, I think, hopefully my kind of nuanced or more balanced look at why I really advocate for holding two things side by side, that within our population, there will be seasons of disability and there'll be seasons of genuine superpower, incredible capabilities. We can have those two things within a space and hopefully hold that conversation more nuanced ways.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you for sharing, because I am just looking through my lens and my experience with incredible people. So obviously you have a extremely different background and as I said earlier, expertise. So I'd still call it expertise. So to be able to explain it in that way, I think is really beneficial. And that's exactly what this podcast aims to do, is to really lift the rug and shine light on these topics that we just don't delve into and just don't take the time. And when you do, it just makes it so much easier to be able to move forward from there. And I think that's what I'd love to chat to you about as well is, well, if a leader's listening to this and thinking, oh, I think I have someone, or if I've got a team of 10, I've probably got 2 people, that 20.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
What can they do to make sure everyone feels included and supported? Are there any tips or tricks that you could give today?
Yeah, let's pick up from, riff on what we were saying just before, in a really practical way. So, and Professor Suzanne Carrington actually shared this metaphor with me, so I want to reference her work up in Queensland. She's brilliant in this space. She talks about thinking about this in really concrete terms of, if I'm someone who wears glasses, my experience of wearing glasses may or may not bother me. I might show up to this conversation, be really self-conscious of the fact that I'm wearing glasses, or I might be showing up to this conversation going, yeah, I'm rocking my glasses. Now, if I'm not so confident about my glasses, I might take them off for our interview and run the interview without them, but I'm probably going to have to go to a lot more effort, right? And so when I put them on and I feel, welcomed to put my glasses on, I can perform at my best. And so, in terms of how I hope that then translates to your listeners, if you are a leader, be mindful that the culture that you set up is potentially going to either provide space and signal psychological safety for disclosure, or it's not. And there's probably shades of gray within that. So first and foremost, looking at, the different climate types, and, according to the literature, there's sort of 3 psychological climates we want to be thinking about in terms of that question of, well, does your organization and do you as a leader signal to people that you're speaking to, either at that one-to-one or that sort of more macro level of community, that you are inclusive? Because one of the really simple things to be thinking about is remembering that everybody is on a completely different journey. So if I'm an adult and I'm only just realizing that, oh, I think I might be neurodivergent, probably I'm getting a lot of my information from the internet, right? I'm not necessarily seeing a professional. And so I'm trying to figure out for myself, how do I integrate this into my identity? If I then show up to a workplace with a leader who says, oh yeah, but I don't see your neurodivergent as a disability, we're interested about your strengths. Am I in that moment necessarily going to feel validated about where I'm at with my journey? Which isn't to take away from the intentionality of the leader who wants to make their person feel welcomed and respected. So first and foremost, I think remembering that beginner's mindset, remembering that the glasses that you're wearing to see the world are going to be really different from the lens that your potential employee or a staff member is viewing their world. So always asking open-ended, curious questions like, if somebody does disclose, wow, I didn't know that about you. Thank you for sharing, holding space and validating and recognizing that was something probably highly personal, that they've given you a little gift of gold into your hand. So thank you for sharing. What parts of that do you think is really important for us to explore? Because I'm interested in you coming and being at your best here. What would be helpful for me to know? And how can we set up an environment so that you feel safe to share, and that we can communicate that more broadly for you to be at your best? So all of those how might we questions, just from a really practical perspective. But let's go to maybe those 3 psychological climate types that can really support psychological safety and signal. And I think this is important. I'll share a link if you like, Nicole, afterwards. There's a 2023 paper by McDowell and colleagues that looked at how neurodivergence is showing up in the workplace, and 64% of neurodivergent either current or potential employees disclose that they wouldn't share of their neurotype and access available accommodations because of their experiences with stigma and discrimination. So when you know that statistic, you go, okay, there ain't no point having these fancy policies and procedures if somebody's not going to disclose, because we can't do anything with information we don't have, right? So if we go to those psychological climates, and I can share these with you afterwards in a little cheat sheet if you like. But the first one is what's the perception of your diversity climate? So this is looking at, the extent to which the organization is able to communicate more broadly their philosophy, their values, and their lived reality of how they include neurodivergent people. So if I'm coming into your organization for the first time, is it really clear to me that you are celebrating different neurotypes here? Not because you've got a fancy statement on your wall, but because I can see across your hierarchical organization and your structure of the organization that you have people like me represented. And are those people then involved in your communication policies. Can I see myself within your organization in a way that's very clear and explicit? So the second one would be that perceived inclusion climate. So this is in terms of that feeling of a sense of belonging. So what you and I are doing today, for example, would be a really great example of this. As a potential candidate coming into an organization, or even as an existing employee, can I see active, involved effort for people to have open-minded, curious, non-judgmental, individualized conversations? And what does that look like? And can I see examples of policies and procedures where there have been different neurotypes and different cultural backgrounds, different gender types contribute to those policies, and what does that look like? And then the third climate is around that perceived ethical climate. And this is more to do with the practical policies, the values and the practices. So particularly as it applies to recruitment, is there a very clear communications protocol? If I am going to disclose, can I see what's going to happen with my information and whether or not it's going to be treated confidentially? Or am I going to be concerned about, well, if I tell you, are you going to go and tell Bob and Sue in the cafeteria before I've even had a chance to meet Bob and Sue and know what kind of people they are? So I think getting the psychological climate right, first and foremost, and really having some deep, honest conversations and explorations as a leadership team with people from the neurodivergent community, so different representative groups, and they're going to be within your organization, and or consulting with consultants outside of your organization and doing your reading. Exceptional, for example, is another fantastic organization doing great work in this space. Obviously, if anyone wants to have a conversation, get in touch with me. There's a lot of people doing really great consulting work in this space to give you a bit of a heads up of how you can get these climate indicators right. But then I think the most practical takeaway I want for your listeners is just to be really mindful of that beginner's mindset and recognize if you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met one neurodivergent person. And so asking, getting really curious about how do they see the world and how can you be supportive and what does support look like for them will be really beneficial.
Yeah. Thank you. And what about on the other side? What should a neurodivergent person do to improve or make their work life easier?
Yeah. Oh, wow. This is like, oh, I'm so excited. So the scope for this is huge. And I think because it's huge, it can feel really overwhelming. So there's been a lot of conversation in the media at the moment of what is going on, why are all these adults all of a sudden rushing and getting diagnosed, all of a sudden there's this overdiagnosis concern. For particular neurotypes, I mean, ADHD has been one that's been, coming out in the media. What I would say to that is if you actually look at the real data and statistics, and again, happy to share it with you, we are still not hitting our anticipated diagnostic percentages. So there's actually an underdiagnosis that's happening. It's just that the conversation's becoming bigger. And I think that's a really good thing. So that's something. As a neurodivergent person, if you're listening, I want you to know that if you've got a gut instinct that this is worth exploring, explore it. Because the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to do some self-development deep dive to understand your strengths and your struggles profile. And you're going to learn some really cool skills if you're reading in the right direction and seeking the right support. They're going to help you with some of your struggles and maximize some of your strengths in a way that ain't going to hurt. So labels aside, that's something to consider. And also recognize that this conversation about how we're overdiagnosing is just like, yeah, we could put all sorts of colorful, funky words to that. I would also consider that as a neurodivergent employee, be mindful of where you're at within your own journey. So a lot of adults coming into recognition of their own identity within this space often do so because neurotypes are quite genetically, they're clumped together. So there's a huge genetic predisposition for neurodivergence. So a lot of adults are coming into recognizing their own profile through going and getting their children assessed and diagnosed. So we're much better now at being able to pick up on neurotypes within our pediatric population, but we're also getting much clearer on, oh, well, this has got a genetic profile, so let's check out what's going for mum and dad, right? So when that's the case, be mindful that when you're looking at what are some of the accommodations that might be helpful, you also want to think about not just how you're showing up in the world, but what the extra demands are on you as potentially as a parent and a carer of a neurodivergent family. So I would say then, with that sort of context in mind, there's two things that I want you to focus on. The first piece is that self-awareness piece. As I always go, if you think about, actually, let's go three. I go AAA model. We want awareness, we want acceptance, and then we want action, right? So the awareness is you can't do anything about something that you don't know exists, right? So once you have this understanding that potentially neurodivergence might better explain some of the struggles and strengths that you've had that seem different to everybody else's, then you want to get to radically know, well, what is my difference? What is my super strength? What is my accommodation areas? And what could they look like? And how are other people doing that? So that's the awareness piece. You might want to work with a coach or a therapist, or if you're lucky enough to have someone in your organization. But there's also lots of really beautiful groups online. I found the most incredible communities online that have really helped with my own journey. So I don't want this to be a conversation where we're not thinking about that equity aspect. Then once you've got your awareness working, you want to be thinking about the acceptance lens. And this is where that conversation of disability versus difference might come into play. There's a journey of accepting that there are parts of my brain, as somebody who has ADHD or identifies with ADHD, that I might be able to nudge in the direction that I want to nudge, but I'm always going to struggle with. And depending on what's going on with my life, with my hormones, with other stresses, with whether I'm getting enough sleep, with all sorts of stuff, that level of effort in terms of how much I have to accommodate or seek assistance, it's going to shift. So that's that acceptance piece, and that radical acceptance piece of I have a different neurotype. And so I want to be understanding of that. Then there's the action. There are parts that are out of my control. So there's brain-based differences that I might be able to nudge a little bit, but maybe not enough to see significant changes that would make me neurotypical, for example. But then there are practical things that I can do. So I can ask for supports. I can choose career paths that really leverage my strengths. I can work and design my life in a way that plays to my areas of strength more than it does my weaknesses. So that's the action part. So in addition to the awareness piece, I think really that self-advocacy, those skills of knowing how to communicate first and foremost to yourself and your family, but then how confident do you feel? Have you got the support structures in your workplace? Or if you work for yourself, who is it within your network that you can start to practice showing up in a way that speaks to your difference, in a way that celebrates that equal part of struggle and strength. So there's a lot of really explicit, beautiful, which is why I love psychology coaching. It's very practical, and it's very, yes, there's that, that therapeutic component part of let's get rid of the medical conditions. That's all about suffering, and let's work on self-compassion. There's really practical things that we can do to be able to flourish and shine regardless of our neurotype when we're in the right environment.
Yeah. Gosh, Maz, I could talk to you for hours, and I absolutely love that you've given practical tips for leaders and for individuals, because I like to talk about, the topic, but also the solutions instead of just what the issue or perceived issue is. So thank you so much. And I just want to close off by saying that you have a Messy Magic program for ADHD adults. Can you share a little bit about that?
Oh, I love this one. This is a place-based Messy Magic. So I was noticing, speaking to you, and this is where you and I share a real similar love for solution-based thinking here, Nicole. Because I was noticing in my own journey and remembering that, my lens professionally is, yes, I'm trained as a clinical psychologist, but my research is actually in transcendent emotions and purpose and all these beautiful positive psychology principles and how we apply those in organizations and schools. And in my own exploration of ADHD as an adult, and particularly as a woman, I was getting frustrated that while there was lots of information emerging about ADHD in general and how it shows up and all the executive function differences, and refer your readers to a couple of books, which I'll send you in an email later, but Russell Barkley's book was great. I really found it's heavy, but it's great. And Tracy Otsuka has just released one as well, which is brilliant. But in my readings, I was noticing a lot of the conversation and what was practical was very male dominated. And two, it was all looking at this through this very deficit lens. And as somebody who has, really celebrated, I think, my own life of going, yeah, there are parts of Maz that I would like to be different. But there are parts of Maz that I'm actually really proud of and are really super cool. How can I take this from, hey, I actually think I'm functioning, but I want to be flourishing. So Messy Magic was born out of that space for women who were coming into their own ADHD diagnosis a little late, and who, as you were speaking to earlier, may be underrepresented within their organization to a point where maybe their trainer would prioritize them accessing specific training to them, but that they could access a community and a group with that training through this solution that really shows up for us as women, to look at how do those ADHD differences uniquely impact us across our own strengths and struggles, and then gain practical tools that we can take both into our workplaces to show up. So we've got a lot of entrepreneurs, but we've also got a lot of industry leaders who are coming in to explore the program and then be able to take it back into their own organizations, which is awesome. And then for parents as well, because often if you're an ADHD parent, chances are you've got then your own neurodivergent children. And I find that as mothers, we tend to shine a light on really understanding how we can help our kids. And sometimes that's at the cost of not first and foremost recognizing, there's a lot of self-development that we can do. So Messy Magic sort of serves as that affordable, equitable access program to be able to create a beautiful, innovative community of these like-minded women who are all wanting to cheer each other on and learn practical, evidence-based tools that shift both their family and their workplace agenda. So yeah, I'm really excited because we're launching another cohort actually almost as we speak. So I'm happy to share the link if anybody's interested. And that's also, I'll throw that out, that have had a couple of organizations who have got a high proportion of ADHD women within their organization and or who just want to learn more. And so we've been able to tailor smaller group sizes to meet their organizations. So that's something I'm excited to explore again this year. Yeah, it's fun. We have a lot of fun. We go off on lots of tangents. And there's also that digital course. It means that we're very focused and we get to our agendas. So it's good fun.
Best of both worlds.
Exactly.
I just recommend to the listeners today, if you're not connected with Mariane on LinkedIn, do that, and I will send the link below. And also visit your website, marianepower.com.au. It has all of the info on the program. I will link to the books and the articles and the research that you've shared. This has been such a wonderful chat, such a wonderful topic to really deep dive into and bring light to. So thank you so much, Mariane. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome, Nicole. And likewise, I could talk to you for hours. And I do believe we might have a coffee date, scheduled in for our cafe just down the road. So let's make that happen. No, but thank you so much. And to your listeners, I just really appreciate your open ears and your open hearts. And I hope you're able to share some of the insights today in really meaningful ways as well.
Thanks, Maz.